Good morning once again. I'm Alan Abrahamson, and it is my distinct pleasure, honor, and privilege to introduce someone who has produced many, many great sporting moments of his own, Olympic gold medals, numerous world records, and who will deliver the world's biggest sporting event in just about 140 days. Please welcome Lord Seb Coe to the stage, the chairman of the London 2012 Organizing Committee. Seb, you are one of only two Olympians I can think of, Jean-Claude Killy being the other, who has also led an Olympic Games Organizing Committee. What's harder or what means most to you, winning Olympic gold or delivering the Games?
That's a tough opener, actually. And I think you've probably heard me tell this story before, and I will précis it this time. But I think the best way I normally answer that is to remember and Keith Mills, our chief executive during the bid, is sitting behind me, and he will remember this, that the day before the vote in Singapore, we invited the athletes to come and have lunch. And the athletes weren't just there as expensive calling cards, they were really an integral part of the process. And into the room that sort of tended to be the nerve center of the bid in the hotel in Singapore, I invited Tanni Grey-Thompson, probably our most medaled Paralympian, actually a household name in British sport now, Daley Thompson. I'm biased, but I will say this, our greatest ever Olympian. And then Colin Jackson was sitting there, Jonathan Edwards, triple jump world record holder, Olympic champion. And we got into that sort of, dare to dream if what would happen if we got across the line tomorrow. We're 24 hours away from the vote. And I think by discussion and negotiation, we all effectively said we would be prepared to hand back anything we'd done individually in our sports in order to get the right decision. It did take Daley slightly longer than the rest of us to sort of get to that. And even now he denies that he agreed to that deal. But I think we recognize, seriously, I think we recognize that I like to think we probably put more bums on seats in track and field or whatever sport we're involved in, and that's part of the inspiration. But I do think we probably recognize that the ability to deliver off the back of a 7-year program collectively with government, the mayor, the IOC, our national governing bodies, the businesses, the boroughs, all the stakeholders on board, and release that kind of spirit that this city understands off the back of the Games, just had to be more profound than anything we'd done individually, including gold medals.
We've been on this journey together. I will remember the moments in Singapore, one of which was this amazing video we're going to see. Jean-Pierre, let's roll this video because it speaks to the powerful emotion that underpinned, I think you would agree, Seb, almost everything that London was trying to do and is trying to do, yes?
Any bidding city will tell you it's a tough ask to try in the space of 40 minutes to synthesize that 2.5-year journey, and actually longer. The British Olympic Association were working, on this through Craig Reedy.
But this is a brilliant video.
From 97, so capturing all that in a few moments is quite tough.
But we've made the editorial decision here to show you this video in its entirety because it is so brilliant. So Jean-Pierre, would you please show it?
To make an Olympic champion takes 8 Olympic finalists. To make an Olympic finalist takes 80 Olympians. To make an Olympian takes 202 national champions. make a national champion takes thousands of athletes. To make an athlete, it takes millions of children around the world inspired to choose sport.
Nigeria's Onoki Tombiri has realised his boyhood dream here in London. He is the 2012 100-metre Olympic champion.
上舉轉睇1週半，簡直係出神入化。喺倫敦嘅觀眾亦都睇到歎為觀止。哇！妙極嘅前空翻2周落地，穩陣落地，喐都唔喐，為喺倫敦嘅奧運體操項目。
La final de London 2012 y muy veloz lo que está haciendo el hombre que cierra, Andrew Bailey, y el último tiempo para Australia 56.
Лондон. Соревнования на 100 метров баттерфляем. И старт! На половине дистанции вперед вырывается Эрик Ловас. Он чуть-чуть опережает Стива Джонса и Джастина Майклса. Гонка идет между Джонсоном и Ловасом. Последние несколько метров, похоже, Ловас. Зрители в Лондоне просто в восхищении. Атмосфера прекрасная.
Here in London, he is the 2012 Olympic champion.
I mean, I've seen that video 2 dozen, 3 dozen times, and I still get chills.
You should have seen Donna De Verona a moment ago watching the swimming sequence in that. That was, I'll always remember that, Donna.
One of the things I've learned from you, and I'm not ashamed to say it, is that Olympic bid contests are about how and why. That's it. Essentially how and why. Everything else is noise. That video perfectly tells the why story because it says clearly and cleanly that the why is about a passion for sport. That's it. And that's what makes the games in London, for people like me who write about it, so interesting and so compelling, because that's what these games are really about, what the games can do for modern society. I think that's what these games really are about, simply put.
Yes, and actually, you know, many people, you know, friends I see sitting around here are in overtly commercial organizations, and they would spend, as we all do, a lot of time understanding what people are saying about us, who our client groups are. But actually, my experience through this whole process is that the narrative is always a little closer to home than you think. I mean, the narrative for that film was very clear for me. It was unambiguous. It wasn't sort of arcane maritime law. It was actually the story told in a slightly different way of my own journey. As a 12-year-old kid, joined a local athletics club because I saw something on television. I'm now carbon dating myself at the Mexico Olympic Games. And the rest, as they say, is history. And I know that goes for any number of people sitting in this room. They see something at a formative moment in their life when it just changes the way you see the world. And in a way, that's really all we sought to try and tell over that 2-year period. And I couldn't really allow the campaign to descend into who had better menu ranges, what were, you know, hotel occupancy rates, were there better shopping opportunities in Paris, Madrid, New York. We just had to keep it on territory that we understood. And it was as simple as that. And for me, it was always about using the games to inspire more young people to take up sport. And I think that is the vision that we've delivered against pretty much every day. There, of course, are massive bridgeheads. You're sitting in a city that changed the landscape in terms of the regeneration around the games. You know, if the 20th century was about bringing sport to the world, the 21st century should be about bringing sport to young people. This city did it in an extraordinary way in 1992 by just changing the face of a city through sport. If you just look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are insightful. You know, this is a city that at the end of this process created 70% more green space, linked a city centre to a beach, created affordable housing, turned the economic fortunes of a city around. This is a city that wasn't in the top 16 venues in Europe before 1992. It's never been out of the top 4 since then. And tourism is now the second largest driver of economic activity here. It's an extraordinary story. It is, at this point in the Olympic movement, it is by a country mile the best regeneration legacy story around the Games.
There's no question, and it's why everyone everywhere says we want to be like Barcelona. This is how I started this forum. I said I'm thrilled to be back in Barcelona, and it's why everywhere I go they say every mayor, every governor, every president says he or she, I want to be like Barcelona.
Oh, we unashamedly, I mean, I'm open about it, we unashamedly took our cue. My first visit after effectively we nicked across the line in 2005 was to come here. It was to sit down with Marigall, it was to sit down with the town planners. I came down here with Secretary of State.
Teach us your magic.
Tessa Jowell, you know, and I remember saying to one of the architects, I said, you know, okay, the proof of the pudding was, where do you live? And he pointed up to the 5th floor of the block that he'd created. So, no, it's an extraordinary story.
So some of the nuts and bolts, we'll get back to the vision thing, as one of the former presidents of my country would have said in just a sec. You're on time and within budget. The headlines in everyone's newspapers scream disaster, disaster, catastrophe, calamity every day, and yet you and your very capable team, which I might add.
And that's just my kids.
which I might say, as was pointed out at the IOC Women in Sport Conference in Los Angeles just a few weeks ago, is remarkably diverse. You've made a huge commitment to hiring women, people of color, remarkably diverse. It's a model for every big corporation that ought to be studied and emulated. You have delivered.
And it's not a nice to have.
No, it's a must have.
It's critical to having a properly running, properly governed organization.
Absolutely. People must and should be studying this in the future about how to do this. You have delivered. How have you done this in these demanding economic times?
On the specific point about making sure that our organization fundamentally reflected the country and the city and actually the boroughs that we're delivering the games in. You know, I just throw out a couple of numbers which are actually important here. You know, we're sitting with a head count at this moment of about 3,200 and something. We will double our numbers between now and the opening ceremony. We set ourselves a target of creating 20% of those jobs from the local communities. We're on that target. We set ourselves a target of making sure that of those jobs, 15% were in the communities that have been long-term unemployed. We've hit that target. I can tell you I've got as many, if not more, women in positions of leadership in my organization than I have men. I can tell you that we've got an organization, I think about 51% of my organization is women. I know that because all 51% walked past my office the morning Jude Law came in to see me. And because we are a diverse employer, a few of them were men as well. And it's really important that you reflect the community, you reflect the country that you're delivering your games in. And on the rest of it, it's been tough because, as Keith will tell you, we were bidding when the world economy was at a high watermark. We brought some key partners in to that process early, but the bulk of what we've raised was still raised post the downturn.
You raised $3.2 billion American, if I remember right, correct?
Yeah, we set a stretch target of about 700 million UK from the domestic market. We've brought 44 fabulous business partners to the table, 50-odd licensed merchandising agreements. And we have, we're hoping for, in terms of our merchandise, we're hoping for about £1 billion turnover, which I will look carefully to Keith, which we hope will make a contribution of about 80 million to the bottom line.
Sir Keith.
Yep.
Pretty darn good in these times.
I never go anywhere without the numbers, man.
I understand. That's a remarkable achievement.
Well, I think it's partly due, look, I think we have...
On time and in budget.
Well, on time and in budget, but actually our commercial team we built internally. So we didn't use outside agencies or consultants. I think we felt that we wanted to create that from inside.
Let me interrupt for 1 sec, Seb. Excuse me. On time, in budget, and in the public eye, under the watchful eye of a feral press.
I wouldn't say feral.
I would.
Okay, you can say feral. I would say, no, I don't think any games has been delivered in a media marketplace that has been quite as forensic. And actually, in fairness, that has made us a better organization.
For sure.
And I say that occasionally through gritted teeth, but it has. And
these are my friends in the press.
No. We are not at war in the media.
I know.
We have very good, strong relationships. And occasionally it gets feisty, but that's the nature of it. And actually, I would rather have a forensic British press that keep...
Forensic, that's a great word.
They keep you on your toes, and again, it's not always the most comfortable experience, but actually it's better to have a free press that are monitoring and watching, and actually occasionally coming up with some thoughtful observations.
Thoughtful observations, that is fantastic. So we've talked about delivery. You have built the largest park in London in 150 years. I think it's appropriate now to take a little flyover of that park so you can see what has been built and delivered. Jean-Pierre?
Back in July 2005, when the president of the International Olympic Committee, Jacques Rogge, announced that London would host the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, it was hard to believe that a hugely neglected part of the UK's capital city would be at the centre of the world's greatest sporting celebration. What of today, though, the start of 2012? Well, you don't have to imagine anymore.
From the air, the transformation is clear. The Olympic Park, with its 21st century venues, its waterways, parklands and wetlands, sparkles like a jewel in the east of London. At its heart, the 80,000 capacity Olympic Stadium. The turf's down, the track's down, the huge screens are installed, and work continues to make sure that everything is ready for the spectacular opening and closing ceremonies and the thrilling weeks of track and field athletics. It is of course here that the Olympic torch will arrive after the 10-week relay around the entire country. The stadium is surrounded by water on 3 sides and accessed by 5 new bridges. The bridges will give the tens of thousands of daily visitors easy access to the many venues that surround the stadium, including the Aquatic Centre, Zaha Hadid's spectacular architectural roof making it perhaps the most iconic venue on the park. It has a new neighbour, the temporary water polo arena. Inside the Aquatic Centre, work is complete and testing continues both in the training pool and in the sensational main and diving pools. These Olympic and Paralympic standard facilities will be left behind as part of the extraordinary legacy of the Games. To the north of the stadium is the Copper Box. It's where handball will be played, and it will remain a 6,000-seat arena for sport and concerts after London 2012. But it's not just handball that will take place here. Elements of the modern pentathlon and goalball is one of the exciting Paralympic sports that this gleaming venue will also host. Beyond the International Broadcast Centre and the main press centre that will house 20,000 of the world's media are the 2 brand new hockey pitches that will form the Riverbank Arena when complete. Their unique selling point is obvious. They are the first pitches to have a striking blue playing surface. The colour is not just dramatic, it helps both the players and spectators pick out the new style yellow hockey ball much more easily. Many of the 4,000 new trees and 500,000 new plants are growing to the east of the Riverbank Arena in the North Parklands. Just by the River Lee, one of a number of giant live sight screens will be sited during the Games, allowing visitors to watch the events in a stunning landscape. Overlooking the parklands is the Olympic and Paralympic Village. 23,000 athletes and officials will stay there during the Games, and afterwards it's home to a whole new community. There are 11 blocks, all with communal areas, shops and local medical facilities. Next to it, the basketball arena. This is one of the park's temporary venues that will be taken down after the Games and recycled or reused elsewhere. Basketball has already hosted a fantastically successful test event. The first sporting venue to have building works completed on the park was the Velodrome, a real showcase of British design and construction that will benefit the community long after the Games have gone. Outside, the rip-roaring BMX track has been completed. To the north of the Velodrome, Eton Manor, site of the historic start of construction for the Olympic Park. Today though, it's a brand new venue for wheelchair tennis and also training swimming pools for the Games. After 2012, these will be transformed into an invaluable local sports centre for hockey, five-a-side football and tennis. And as if this vast park wasn't enough, the events for London 2012 spread throughout the capital at 18 other venues such as Excel, the North Greenwich Arena, Hadley Farm, Horse Guards Parade and Greenwich Park, where test events continue to be held. The sheer scale of London 2012 is enormous, and the excitement palpable.
The transformation has been breathtaking. The effort involved Olympian. Now with days and months to go rather than years until the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, final preparations are underway to make sure that everything is just right for the moment when the eyes of the world are on that stadium, the lighting of the Olympic flame to signal the start of the Games of the 30th Olympiad.
I saw what that looked like before this.
You do have to pinch yourself when you see a film like that, because it seems barely credible that it was 8 years ago
I mean, it was sewage.
Well, yeah.
An abattoir, to use your word.
Well, we've had breakfast. I think we're probably all right to discuss that. But, you know, I do remember standing with Keith on the top of a tower block overlooking the park.
It was a nursing home, right?
It was a nursing home. We built a viewing platform on the top of it and trying to, you know, I mean, sounding, if I'm being honest, a little bit like a timeshare salesman, saying, you see that rotting pile of fridges over there? Well, that's where the aquatic centre's going, and you see the bicycles that are in the river there. Well, actually, we're going to clean that up, and alongside that will be the Olympic Stadium. And you could see them sort of thinking, well, okay, this is an interesting concept. And to have watched it develop in that way. And here I pay a huge tribute, and there's an important message here. I mean, I pay a huge tribute to the Olympic Delivery Authority. You know, we got out of the traps quickly. This was the organisation that was charged with two responsibilities. Firstly, regenerating East London. Secondly, building the venues. And doing the two at the same time was sensible. You know, it poses problems when you are forever going to get arguments about, well, what's an operational budget, what's an infrastructural budget, what's an investment in a community, what's a cost. You know, those are the things that the Olympic movement have always had to deal with. But the reality of it is that they did a fabulous job. And I think the lesson we took from that, and that I'd taken from other games, is that I had noticed that whenever there was a disconnect or there was a lack of momentum in a games project, it was normally because there was too much physical distance between the organising committee and the infrastructural deliverers. And we made a conscious decision to co-locate in the building. So what in reality does that mean? It means that the chairman of the Olympic Delivery Authority is a couple of offices away from me. We want to discuss something. We're not fighting to get into each other's diaries in 2 weeks. We just walk into each other's office. Paul Dighton, our chief executive, meets pretty much every day with the chief executive of the Olympic Delivery Authority. So it was actually keeping that relationship very, very close. And also just recognizing that 75% of what you see in that video is actually about long-term legacy. Yes, of course, it's creating the infrastructure for 16 days of extraordinary sport, but you know, the housing, the hospital, the school, the 1 million tons of soil that was washed on the site, 95% of all that material was recycled. The ability to transform the lives of young people again through sport. You know, you've just seen probably 5 years of construction that under normal circumstances would have probably taken 30 or 40 years.
This is why people want the Olympics. Nothing concentrates the deadline so ferocious. Nothing concentrates the mind so ferociously as a deadline.
And to make the point, which is an obvious one again, you know, look at the city we're sitting in.
And this is why, again, everyone is entitled to their opinion, excuse me, about the Olympics. I say look again at Barcelona and look again at what happens 20 years down the line. Look again at Seoul, 20 years more or less, at where Seoul was in 1988 and where it is now. Look at Barcelona now. Look even at Atlanta, which was by some measures not such a successful Olympics, but by many measures Atlanta is a very, very, very different city now than it was. 20 years from now, London is going to be remarkably transformed because of what is happening now. I mean, that's the whole point of an Olympic Games.
Well, the reality of it is, you know, and I don't want to get into a sort of dull economic trilogy here, but actually the reality of it was that if you'd gone back into that community 60 or 70 years ago, 70% of employment, disposable income was all related to the docks, the port. As that collapsed, a lot of the supplementary businesses around the area went with it. You know, we're talking about unemployment levels in some of those boroughs bordering 30, 40%. You know, the example we tend to use, and sorry, I will repeat it because I think it is a good one. You know, if you get onto the Jubilee line, which is our metro system, out to the Olympic Park, there are about 9 or 10 stops. Every time you get off at one of those stops, you lose a year's life expectancy from the city centre. So, you know, we were dealing with much, much more than simply the ability to successfully stage an Olympic Games, and that was an inseparable part of the vision.
at the risk of being trite, and I really hope I'm not being, the whole point of this forum is what's next, and that's the answer to this question in regards to this project with what you've done there. Right, so doubling back to what's going on now, this series of test events are going on now. They've been already remarkably successful, which bodes well for what's coming up in July. Tell us about some of the test events that are going on now.
Well, I think it's, you can't see the test, you can't discuss a test event without actually, again, returning to one of our core visions. We talked about using the games to transform the lives of young people, get more into sport, but the second plank of that, of course, was to put athletes at the heart of the project.
At the center of everything.
If you do that, and you know, it's easy for me to say that because, you know, I've been to the games and I competed, but actually that's not just the sort of thing I would say because I was a former competitor or that there was an emotional connection. It's actually, there's strong intellectual rigor there. If you put the athlete at the center of the project, you, by implication, have to get so much else right. You can't, by conscience, invite somebody who has spent half their young lives getting to this life-changing moment if your transport unravels after a few hours of an opening ceremony, the training venues and the competitive venues are, you know, are just not functioning properly. You have to provide them with a village, which is not just a place where you sleep. It is, you know, it's the inner sanctum for 3 weeks. It's where you build the confidence, the calm, the inner reserve to do what you have to do. So for me, making sure that your number one client group is, which is the athlete, center stage, is actually the smart thing to do because you just have to get so much else right with the project if you have them there.
So,
and the test event is a simple concept. Sorry, you did ask the specific question. The test event's a simple concept. Again, viewed through the eye of an athlete, and anybody that's competed sitting around here would know when I say the last thing you want is to be thrown something that you have not dealt with 100 times on the training track or in the pool beforehand.
On the
Olympic final is not the time to find that out. That's the same analogy for us in delivering a test event.
But you want to make mistakes now. On the other hand, you sort of want to have big or little mistakes come up now so you can fix them.
Yeah, no. I sat at 5:45 in the morning in central London on Bank Holiday Monday. Yeah. You know, I sat on a curbstone, sitting, talking to some of our Paralympic racers and asking them, you know, and absorbing all the information because they'd just been round the course, absorbing all the information about gradients, about tightness of bends, where are your run-off positions. That's the sort of stuff you need. And I don't panic when they say to me, you've got stuff to do, because I welcome it, because I don't want them. I'd rather have that question being asked of me now than in 5 months' time. I can't look, I don't want to look an athlete in the eye and think that there is some stone we left unturned that made the difference between you making it out of the first round into the cross heats or from silver to gold. I tell the teams every day, and it's become a mantra, the athlete must never become victims of our shortcomings.
8 years ago, the run-up to the Athens Olympics was, for me and many of my colleagues in the press, what I've lovingly called it a full employment act. It was a never-ending series of stories. Beijing was a very different run-up. You have been so calm as to be deadly dull. It's been a huge bummer.
Well, I often get my marching orders from Jackie Brock-Doyle and our comms team. And often my marching orders before I go to a press conference or do an interview is I often say, what do you want out of that? And they look at me absolutely coldly and say, absolutely nothing. No headline, nothing. Just, you know. And actually, it's important that you maintain. Because it's too long a project to allow yourself to get caught up in the emotional roller coaster. You know, you're there for 7 years. Some of us, by next year, will have done nearly a decade on this project. You know, you can't get too excited by the best, and you certainly can't get too depressed by the worst, because life generally sort of meets you halfway.
So that said, you and I can both identify within 2 nanoseconds the 2 major issues that confront any Olympics, and they are number 1, security, and number 2, transport. they're both kind of out of your particular hands, and yet they both need to go right. What assurances can we both make, not me, you, with the public authorities that they're going to work?
I'd far rather you made those assurances.
Oh no, I'll be very critical, believe me.
Well, you're right. They are the two meaty chunks of the project. They tend, and actually in project management terms, of course, they tend to come towards the end of the project because you know, in both parts of that project, both those meaty bits, you're actually incrementally and sequentially bringing it to the table because you understand much more about it as you go along. And it's inevitable, you know. You've got 1,000 sporting sessions. You know, you've got the integration of your training venues with your competition venues. You know, in transport terms, you know, you're sitting there with Transport for London in the lead, and they're sitting down with all the, you know, figuring out the working rosters and figuring out, you know, what happens if you're over your opening ceremony runs over. Have you got the capacity? All those sorts of things, and they tend to come towards the end of it. The one thing I would say about transport is that I think for a lot of people when we were bidding, they thought or concluded early on this was our Achilles heel. And I think our teams always saw it ultimately as being a very good public transport story.
Me too.
There's hardly been well, I will say this, I don't think there's been an Olympic city that moves so many people per hour, particularly at peak time, around its city on public transport. You know, the parcel of land that you've just seen being regenerated was served when we set out on this bid process by 9 rail lines. The 10th, the Channel Tunnel rail link, allows us to take 25,000 people in and out of the park in an hour on 12 shuttles that take 6 minutes from central London into the Olympic Park. Now, I'm not sitting here pretending that putting the transport overlay around a large city of 9 million people with the complexity of London, designed around medieval architecture, which is what London is. London is not a modern city. It's not blocks. It's not Beijing where you go 3 miles in one direction and 3 miles in another direction. And you know, lanes and a rapid transport system is a complication. But we do it very well, and we will deliver. And on security, you know, I think security is best not discussed in great detail, but we work in a collaborative way. Government and through them operationally, the Metropolitan Police are, of course, take the lead role. And we will deliver a safe and secure games. There is no public appetite for cutting corners on this. And again, these are numbers and a project that comes to the table towards the end because you understand inevitably so much more about it as you go forward. But there is another important point here, and that is that the delivery of a security plan has to be proportionate. You know, this is not the world's biggest security event with a little bit of sporting overlay around. You know, we want people to come to London. This is the largest celebration of sport in a 4-year cycle. And we want them to come to a city feeling that they've not arrived in siege town. And you know, I will say it, I'm a Londoner. The Metropolitan Police is the best police force in the world. We'll get that balance right.
One huge element of what you have talked about consistently since 2003 has been legacy. Sir Keith got an award here last night, and I want to double back to this, and it's a program called International Inspiration.
Yep.
If it's not one of your most successful programs, maybe it is already the most successful program. Sir Keith talked about the numbers, 12 million children, up to 15 million children already in over 20 countries.
20 countries, yeah.
In many ways, you could argue, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that these games probably will be a rousing success. I mean, I think they're going to be a big party. I think that's going to be a vibe that's very different from Beijing, which was a historical, monumental...
wonderful games.
Wonderful games. But I think these games are going to be a big party along the lines of Sydney, only bigger and partier.
My nation doesn't normally take massive encouragement to party.
Right. But there has to be more than just a party.
Yeah.
And that's what this International Inspiration Program is about.
Yeah.
So if I could ask you a question about it, and then we have a truly great video to watch. Why international inspiration?
Well, I think we wanted to be true to ourselves. You know, if you look at the history of the United Kingdom, we are historically, we are currently, and I sincerely hope in future, a nation that engages. We have always looked out on the world. You know, that's just a part of our history. And we felt it was as equally important to have an international dimension to this. You know, London is an extraordinary city. It's made up of 300 different communities, 200 different languages are spoken. If I'm being honest, if you look at those metrics, it probably only New York gets anywhere near that kind of diversity. And we just wanted to almost remind ourselves that we weren't just delivering an Olympic Games for domestic consumption, that a host city really should take upon itself at least some responsibility for driving some of those values beyond the narrow discussion about your own domestic legacy. And it felt natural to us because we were working with the grain of what we do so often. You know, the partners that have come together, the British government, UNICEF, UK Sport, British Olympic Association, some good sponsorship, including some support from the Premier League. This was really what we do regularly. A lot of the projects we haven't over-engineered. They're simple projects. Keith will have taken you through all this, but you know, one good example is 17,000 young people die every year in Bangladesh when the floods come through. You don't need to over-engineer the project to realize that what they are really in need of...
Swim lessons.
Swim coaches. So, you know, these are the sorts of things that we've been doing. We take our time in the country to understand what it is that we really can help and make a difference with. And he and I are really committed. You know, when we've delivered and dissolved and gone back to doing whatever we do in future, we're really committed to maintaining this as a going concern.
Let's roll the video, please, Jean-Pierre.
My involvement with London's winning bid in Singapore in 2005 made me realise the power of the Olympic Games. Seb Coe promised to inspire young people around the world through sport. The result is international inspiration. The programme is now making a significant difference to literally millions of children and young people around the world, from Zambia to Bangladesh.
We've got 12 million youngsters that we want to reach in 20 countries. We want to help them be enriched. We want to help them to be educated. We want them to have a better future. All done by the power of sport.
International inspiration has now reached over 12 million young people around the world and connected them to the power of sport. I was lucky enough to visit a school in Manchester where the children had linked up with another school in Malaysia through the International Inspiration Programme, and it was a fantastic thing to see in how International Inspiration has enriched their lives and that the kids have benefited from sport.
I'm here with street children in Delhi, and what I've been amazed at is just how vibrant they are. Some have no parents, they have no homes. What they need is that one beacon of light to show them that they can achieve things.
International inspiration encouraged me to actually be out there and be an example to young people and show them that positive things can come out no matter the area you come from, like my area, for example. You could actually go out there and do something good.
For me, this is really an extraordinary example of seeing in reality the work of young people as youth leaders with young people.
there's a real legacy. I've seen it firsthand in Jordan, seeing young disabled boys included in mainstream PE lessons and seeing the joy on their faces where they're part of their classes. But also, when they go out into society, they're included by all their friends and their family.
International inspiration is about making all the people from around the world to be one nation and inspiring young minds and young people to be more involved in sports, because sports is a great thing. It keeps people out of bad things and to think out of the box.
International inspiration has kept the promise and is building a real and lasting legacy around the world.
International inspiration will give children around the world more access to sport, which provides them with better education opportunities, increases their aspirations for the future.
I especially love the scene of the young man in Jordan. It's a great picture. Jean-Pierre, could you pull up the picture of Usain Bolt there, please? Just switching gears here to another subject that's near and dear to both of us. Your sport, which in most of the world is called athletics, in my country is called track and field. The last 8 days of the Olympic Games will feature competition, presumably if he's not hurt, this gentleman right here. Last week, I believe it was, you gave an interview in which you talked about the possibility of him possibly running 9.4.
I had to say that because I've just been made the honorary president of his track club.
I've had the great privilege of watching each of his world records from the press tribunes. I agree. If he's on it, there's no reason he couldn't run 9.4.
No, absolutely.
He is a marvel. We have never seen anyone like him in human history. If the conditions are right, he very well could run a low 9.4, actually. What would that do if he did it at the Olympic Games?
Make me very happy. No, I hope he does. I really hope he does.
I hope he does too.
And the only, of course, actually we've designed a stadium that is sheltered. We'll have the fastest track
for sure.
Currently available to mankind, humankind. And the only imponderable, of course, as you know, is really the weather conditions.
And the one-and-done false start rule.
Yeah. Well, he isn't going to get any change out of that.
Which I'm a bitter critic of.
No, I know. And we'll take that offline.
Yes.
But no, he's capable of doing that. Interestingly, of course, the great thing about track and field is that track and field has always been at its best when we've had head-to-heads.
Yes. And
I think we were rather assuming a year ago
that Tyson Gay might be the guy.
Tyson Gay and Asifa Powell. But of course,
Johan
it may
Blake.
just be that the biggest competition he faces is a Jamaican, but maybe not Asifa Powell, maybe Johan Blake, who came within a click of taking his 200-meter world record in Brussels in the Van Damme meeting at the end of the year.
Indeed.
So this has got some added piquancy. But it is an extraordinary, I mean, just digress for a moment. The Jamaican track and field story is an extraordinary story. You know, to say that you know, this is a nation of 11 million people that are now comfortably sitting in 4th place on the league table of track and field. It's an extraordinary story.
What does the sport need, you and I have talked about this lots of times, but for the benefit of the other folks in the audience, what does the sport need to do to become what it was when you were running? When you were running in the 80s, the sport was a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah.
Now, not so much.
Well, I think that a number, I mean, this is a much longer conversation, but actually you can't really, I don't think you can separate some of these discussions from where football was as a sport, particularly in my own country. You know, if you look at football in the 70s, which was sort of around about the time the renaissance in British athletics was taking place, football, by any stretch of the imagination, was a poor product. I've always been a passionate football fan. It's what I do at weekends. But, you know, I'm not sure I would have allowed my kids to have gone to a British football ground in the mid to late 70s in the way that my parents seemed pretty calm about me sliding off to a football club. So parents were beginning to vote with their feet at that time and heading their kids towards track and field. And suddenly, it also helped that we weren't just winning odd races, we had a whole generation of athletes coming through that people could look at and say, hey, they are genuinely world class. In football, we have been the permanent underperformers internationally. You know, our Premiership sides have intermittently played pretty well in international competitions, but, you know, we haven't won a tournament since 1966, and we have to be honest about that. Suddenly, you know, people like Daley Thompson and Steve Ovett and Tessa Sanderson were coming along and beating the world. And people suddenly realized that track and field was a very powerful. It also benefited internationally at the same time. The thing that I think we've got to really understand now is just the changed landscape. And it's not simply about sitting down, figuring out whether you take one round out of the triple jump, or you know, it's about race walking, or can we make it more meaningful for young people? We've got to, as a sport, understand a lot more about the landscape those young people are living in. This is much less about tweaking than really trying to create at junior athletics, recreate for junior athletics and those structures where young people are. And I think they're less individual than they were. I think we also have to be very open about this. Actually asking the average 16-year-old kid to probably do what I did 30-odd years ago, which is at that stage run twice a day and probably run 80 miles a week, it's in the hard basket. You know, you don't go off and play track and field. It's not a game. It doesn't involve a ball. And so we've got to be very much more creative about how we attract young people into track and field, and probably in the early years make it much more of a team effort rather than, you know, a 45-second effort and then 3 hours sitting watching your mates do something and then go home. I think we've got to be much more creative about how we attract youngsters into the sport.
So we have time. They said 5 minutes. I don't even think that, really. By my watch, I've got 2 minutes. Time for really one more question. At the end of the Olympics and the Paralympics, let's say it's a big success, which I expect it to be. Do you sit back in your couch or in your chair, and let's say it is the big success that I expect it to be. What do you say to yourself? Phew, I did it, or that was a big success, or we delivered, or what is the emotion you want to be feeling?
I don't know. I don't know. The event coordinator in me tells me that I want everything to go as smoothly as it possibly can for the athletes. Of course, I want the spectators to have a great experience, and I want the sponsors to feel that they got not just value for money, but recognition for the way they've helped us to bring all this to the table. But no, I mean, you can take the guy out of sport, you'll never take sport out of the guy. So for me, it will be about whether I can genuinely look at athletes and say, hey, I delivered for you. I couldn't be there holding your hand during the 1,500 meters, but I think I created a village. We created the service provision that gave you every opportunity to compete at the highest level. I guess I would be very satisfied if I could look back and say we did everything we possibly could to make this work for them. Of course, you know, let's be a little bit parochial about it. I want big British moments. I want, you know, a good stack of medals, not just because it's nice to finish high up on the medals table. That doesn't really do much for me, but I do want to put national governing bodies in a position to be able to convert those medals into more young kids playing those sports. So there's the sporting legacy bit, but that's not for me. That will be, you know, all the political energy that will be needed at a local and a national level to make sure that the tap doesn't get turned off and we keep building on what we've created in the last 7 years. So I guess somewhere between that. And the second factor, of course, is much longer term. That's sitting on my couch in 10 years' time and trying to figure out whether the politicians and those that are responsible for sports legacy were able to build on what we've created.
As I said at the end of the discussion with Oscar, the games start July 27th, 140 some days.
I think it's about 140.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See you there.
It's 20 Fridays.
Wow. Thank you.